follow the trajectory of your habits. What's the process you've been running for the last 6 months or year or 2 years, and they've carried you almost inevitably to the outcomes that you have right now. Now, I'm not saying that habits are the only thing that matter in life, right? Like strategy matters, luck, randomness, those misfortune, those things can influence the outcome. But by definition, luck and randomness are not under your control, and your habits are. And the only reasonable, rational approach in life is to focus on the pieces that are within your control. So I think goals can be good for setting a sense of direction. They're good for clarity, especially if you have a team, get everybody rowing in the same direction. But once you've decided what the goal is, you should basically set it on the shelf, metaphorically speaking, and spend the vast majority of your time focused on building a better system. How are the habits we're executing each day moving us closer to this outcome that we want? And so where I've come, after talking about this for 5 or 6 years now since the book's been out, where I've come down on it is goals are best for people who care about winning once. Systems are best for people who care about winning repeatedly. If you really want to make progress again and again, if you want to get to the top and stay at the top, you need some process for staying up there, some collection of habits that's going to keep this machine running. So this is why, I say in the book, we don't rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems.
As you were talking, I was thinking so much about business and founders and entrepreneurs because they all have big goals. We want to build the best AI app or the best, restaurant. And they stay really focused on those. But the greatest founders that I think I've met and interviewed on this show are actually really orientated on like what you call in the book first principles and systems. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to become more orientated towards systems and thinking about first principles, like the habits that lead to the goal? Or is it just so that some people have it? Because like Elon Musk is always talking about first principles and he thinks in terms of building the system.
I do think some of it is personality and like what's exciting to you to think about. Like some people are very future oriented and like thinking about what the systems are and what that would lead them to and so on, or more process oriented. But there are a number of questions that you can ask that can help you figure out like what systems you should be focused on. So like a couple of the ones I like, one question is, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? So you have a bunch of habits you're following right now. What path are you on? Can your current habits take you there? And they could be either way. Like sometimes the answer is yes, and what you need is patience. You just need to keep, staying on the path. But sometimes the answer is no, and then obviously something needs to change. You're hoping for one outcome, but then you're following a different lifestyle. So to want the outcome without the lifestyle is to like torture yourself. And what really matters is not, do you want the result? Anybody would like the result if you just hand it to them. The question is, do you want the lifestyle? One of the little things I try to do whenever I have a new business project I'm thinking about or something I'm excited about potentially doing, the first question I ask is, how do I want to spend my days? And so then you like draw a box, and inside that box, how can we make the most money, reach the most people, make the biggest impact, make the contribution that you want to make, but not outside of it. And what happens a lot of the time is people do that in reverse. They start by asking, how can we make the most money or reach the most people or make the biggest impact? And then they decide, oh, well, this is what I want to do, but it's actually outside of how they want to spend their days. And it's not going to work out well because, it goes back to our point previously about, is this fun? That if they don't want to spend their time that way, you're just grinding for a little while and eventually it's not going to work. That's the key for building systems that really work is this how you want to spend your days? The person who wants to live the lifestyle is much better positioned to get the result.
You say that there are multiple problems with goals as a rubric for thinking about what to do or what to aim for. One of them is that winners and losers have the same goals.
Everybody wants the results. Let's say you have 100 people apply for a job. You got a new job opening. Mm-hmm. Presumably, every candidate has the goal of getting the job. The goal is not the thing that determines the outcome. So the person who wins and the 99 people who lose, they have the same goals. You look at the Olympic Games. Presumably any event, everybody who's competing has the goal of winning the Olympic medal, right? Of winning the gold. So the goal is not the thing that makes the difference. So again, winners and losers have the same goals. So if they have the same goals, they cannot be the thing that make the difference in their performance. It has to be something else. Maybe having a goal is part of it. Maybe it's necessary, but it's not sufficient for the outcome that you want. And for that, what you need is a system. You need a collection of habits that are going to make the difference and accumulate into a bigger outcome.
And you say goals restrict your happiness.
There's some implicit promise internally that once I get to this goal, then I'll be happy. Once I write a New York Times bestseller, then I'll feel better about it. Once I achieve this certain number on the scale, then I'll be happy with my body. Once I get to $1 million in revenue, then I'll be happy with the business. And so you're kind of constantly pushing happiness off to the next milestone and thinking that once you get there, then finally you'll be satisfied. But I think, in fact, the better way to do it is to fall in love with the process, to fall in love with the lifestyle. Then you can be happy along the way and still achieve the goals as you go, still achieve the milestones. For a long time, I had trouble with this question of, do I have to be dissatisfied if I want to be driven?
Yeah.
Do you have to be dissatisfied to be driven? Because to me, I felt like there's where I'm at right now and there's where I want to be. And so there's this gap, and that gap is dissatisfaction. That gap is, you want it to change. You want it to close. And it's also what is motivating and driving you is to try to close that gap. And so the healthiest answer, maybe the answer is yes, I don't know. But the healthiest answer that I've come up with is, imagine like an acorn falls from a tree. It manages to take root, becomes a seedling and then a sapling, and eventually grows into this mature oak tree. And at no point in that process, when it was just an acorn, it wasn't criticizing itself for not being a sapling. It was just a sapling. It wasn't criticizing itself for not being an oak. It wasn't dissatisfied with where it was at. And nobody came over and was criticizing it for, oh, I can't believe you're not a full-grown tree yet. But it kept growing the whole time. So simultaneously, you have this thing where it was both perfect at each stage that it was at. Nothing was wrong, and yet it continued to grow. And the reason is because that's just what an oak tree does. That's what it is encoded to do. It is encoded for growth. And so when I look at myself, I think if I put myself in the right position, that's how I feel about it. I am perfectly happy with where I'm at each stage, and yet I'm encoded to grow, right? I'm encoded to keep going. And so I can both be driven and be satisfied. I can both be appreciative of the moment and still moving forward. And I think that works best when you find that thing. Sometimes we call it your strengths. Sometimes we might say it's what you're encoded to do. But when you find that thing that is well aligned for you, and if you do find that, then you can have both of those.
I love that. And I think with age and maturity, I've gotten closer to being in that region where I'm well aware nothing is going to make me happier at all. Like no accomplishment, future, nothing's going to change anything. But at the same time, I'm still striving. And that does feel like a contradiction to some degree. It feels like, how can those two things be true at the same time? That you're striving for things that won't really move the needle in any way. The difference I see between like me and something in nature is that the thing in nature probably isn't comparing itself on Instagram to like everyone else. And I understand humans to be like comparison machines, kind of how we understand the value of things. Like I understand the value of the steak on a menu by the cheap steak and the most expensive one. So I think the middle one is probably right. Do you think much about comparison as a motivating or demotivating force in this picture?
I think it can be very helpful, and it can also be very harmful. So it's just sort of a sense of how you use it. I tend to find it better if you compare small things. So if you compare marketing strategies or squat form or, writing style or, the first sentence of each chapter, like how do I have a good intro? If you compare tactics, then that can be really helpful for building skills and for developing your ability. If you compare big things, marriage, net worth, things like that, it's like that's just kind of a recipe for ending up unhappy. Because as the scale gets bigger, things get more vague. There's so many things involved in marriage, and so or net worth or whatever. You just see one little slice, and you are trying to compare these two big things, but you don't even know what the full picture is.
Okay.
And so, comparison is like the teacher of skills when it's applied narrowly, but it's the thief of joy when it's applied broadly.
That makes sense. Yeah. Earlier on, when you said that ambitious people, they have lots of aspirations, lots of habits they want to start, I was thinking about myself and thinking there's probably 30 habits that I would like to acquire. I'd want to be better at writing. I want to be a runner. I want to be better at speaking. I want to be a better friend and be more attentive with my friends and make sure I text them on their birthdays and all of these new habits that I want to pursue. How does one know which one to aim for first? Is there a framework for knowing?
Yeah, there's some things that you can do. I don't think, to your point earlier about sometimes the riskiest things just take a long time making the decision. Maybe you should just pick one and work on it, and then you can get on to the next one. But I do think there's some level of strategy, which is a good place to start is by asking yourself which habits are upstream from other good things happening. So, for example, I know that if you were maybe the question to start with is when you live a good day, when you feel dialed in, when things are like rolling along well for you, what tends to be part of that day?
Sleep.
Okay, great. So that's, I would say for me, sleep is definitely one. I would say getting my workout in, and usually reading and writing are a part of it, but I think I could just boil it down to reading. If I just read like 10 pages, that often sparks the writing. So like to me, reading is like the fuel for writing for me. So I could say get a workout in and read for 5 minutes or 10 minutes. Those are the two things that are part of a good day. And what happens is they're upstream from a lot of other good things happening. For example, if I get the workout in, yeah, I feel good. I get the benefits of the workout, but I also have a post-workout high for like an hour or two. So my focus and concentration is better. I sleep better at night because I got the workout in. Now I'm tired. I tend to eat better when I work out. It's when I'm not working out that I eat terribly. So that's why, I don't know, it's kind of like I don't want to waste it or something. So at no point was I trying to build better focus habits or sleep habits or nutrition habits. Those just came kind of as a natural consequence of getting the workout in. So what are those things that you do that are upstream from other good things happening? I think those are good like anchor habits to start and focus on. But if I could add another one for myself, I would say it's a little bit of time. It's really just time to think, but it's time to reflect and review. There's this interesting thing that happens if you have a really good work ethic, if you have a strong work ethic and working hard has gotten you far in life, it kind of becomes a crutch. For a long time, I was like, if I ever had a problem, I was like, well, I'll just work my way out of it. I'll just work harder on it until I figure it out. And that's great. That's really powerful for a lot of things. But at some point it breaks, like you can maybe, if you really try, maybe you can work 10% harder or 20% harder, but there's some limit. But if you work on the right thing, well, you could get 100x the result or 1000x the result. And so if you just keep your head down and work hard, it's very unlikely that you'll be spending your time in the highest and best way. And the only way to figure that out is to have time to reflect and review, time to think. So you need enough time to think to figure out what should I be focused on next. And so I think that is it's almost reflection and review is almost like the meta habit that is above all others, because if you give yourself time to reflect and review, then you can troubleshoot your habits and figure out how to adjust them.
I was thinking as you were saying that time to reflect and review is actually also a review of, are my current systems moving me closer? Because when you're talking about that, I was thinking of times in my life where I was so close to like the picture and I was so in the trenches doing the thing that I hadn't come up to even say, actually, is there a system I could put in place to solve this problem over the next 5 or 10 years? Like, for example, is there a person I need to hire? So actually, should I go into the hiring process versus be in there fixing the problem myself? Should I spend 10 hours this week on hiring a candidate to do this, or should I be doing it? But sometimes you get so caught up in the trenches, especially when things are tough and difficult and moving very quickly, that you don't review your systems. And also when you're talking about systems, I thought about how systems sometimes expire.
Sure. Yeah.
Because things change.
That's a great point. And I think this is probably one of the most overlooked things with habits. A lot of the time when someone sits down and they want to build a new habit, they don't say this, but what they kind of assume is what it would mean to be successful with this habit is that I do it for the rest of my life. And that if at some point I'm not doing it, then that must mean that I failed or I quit on it. But that's not how it is at all. Like things have a season, and so habits have to change shape over time. Let's take my my writing habit, for example. The habit that launched my career was I wrote a new article every Monday and Thursday, and I did that for 3 years. So the first 3 years, 150 articles, write twice a week. That was a great habit. They were like 2,000 word pieces or so. But then I signed the book deal for Atomic Habits. I didn't have the capacity to do that and also write the book. So that had to change. I wrote the book for like 3 years, and then the book came out, and now I write a newsletter once a week, and that's much shorter. But I kind of feel like my writing habit is maintained that whole time. It just changed shape. But that's fine. It just needed to shift based on the season. But I don't know. People, they get so attached to one form of a habit sometimes that they don't realize that it's no longer serving them. And I think that's one of the trickier things to give up, is a habit that used to be good for you, that used to work well, but no longer serves you in your current season. I find that I'm kind of a slow learner with that. I
guess parents can probably really relate because they're forced to basically change their goals, and therefore their systems would have to, you're a father of 3, so you probably know this much better than I do. But has there been systems that you've had to sort of...
I think there's lots of inflection points in life. So having kids is one of them. Starting a new job, moving to a new city, it can be big stuff like that. I just talked to a mother who her kids moved out, so she's now an empty nester. She's like, last 25 years I've been parenting all these kids, and now finally they're all out. But it feels in some sense, it almost feels like a loss of identity. You're like, I thought I was one thing and now, feels like things have shifted. But also it just signals an inflection point in life and a new season that you're in. And when your seasons change, your habits often need to change with it.
And you talk about this 4 burners theory, which I guess dovetails into what we're talking about here, where you use this to kind of think about what habits to pursue in any season of life, but also a phrase that I've heard so often, specifically from mothers on the show, comes to mind, which is that you can't have it all at the same time. And I've heard that, I think, 4 or 5 times. Different mothers in particular, which is, says something about society, have said to me that they've had to realize that they can't have it all at the same time.
For sure. So this is not my concept. This is this idea that I came across. It's called the 4 burners theory. And it breaks life into these 4 burners on a stove. So you have work and career as one, you have family, friends, and then personal health, or yourself basically is the other. The idea is that for the burners to really be going well, you can't have all 4 on at the same time.
And burners being the stove.
The stove, the stovetop. So you can choose, you could have 3 going on at kind of like a mid-level, but if you really want them to do well, you can only have 2 on at the same time. And who knows? I don't know if it's true or not or whatever, but it's an interesting idea. And what it does is it gets you to realize, a fundamental part of life is trade-offs. And you cannot be good at everything at the same time. So this is true across projects. If you try to do 7 things at once, spreading yourself thin in 7 different ways, very hard to be excellent. For me, what I think about is life has a series of seasons and life has a series of sequences. So let's say it's not always exactly 10 years, but let's say the big movements in life are roughly 10-year buckets, right? So like for me, building my first business, that was kind of like a 10-year thing. And eventually it led to the launch of Atomic Habits. You maybe get 5 or 6 of those in your adult life. Some of those things make sense to do in a different order than others. Like if you want to travel the world and see a bunch of places and party in Ibiza, you're probably not going to do that in your 60s. You can. There's nobody's saying you can't, but some things are probably better sequenced in other spots. Obviously, there's especially for women, there's a certain limit on if you want to have a family, what decades that happens in. So it's just a matter of sequencing and prioritization. If you look at the tapestry of your life, what do you want the big movements to be, and where do those seasons need to slot in? There is no right answer, but it's interesting. As soon as you realize it's a finite number, and as soon as you realize that trade-offs are always going to be a reality, you have to deal with that in some way. I've decided that right now, while my kids are young, I'm going to turn the career burner down, and that's fine. It's not going to be how it was for the last 10 years, but that's okay because they're only 5 once. They're only turning 6 once. They only go to 2nd grade once, and I want to be there for all that. So there are always trade-offs.
I think that sequence point is super, super interesting. It got me thinking because you're right. There are sort of some constraints, whether they're biological constraints or in the case of your kids, like just natural constraints that mean this season can only happen now.
Here, right.
Yeah.
There's also some things like, both of us are fairly young entrepreneurs. I'm so glad that I started a business in my 20s rather than my 50s. Doesn't mean you can't do it in your 50s. There's nobody saying you can't. It's just that it makes things a lot easier for the next decade. It's easier for me to be there for my kids now because I have control of my time because I did the business part in the previous decade. And
so you took the risks.
Yeah. And that doesn't mean it's always going to work out or whatever. It doesn't mean that you're going to be able to perfectly plan it all, but you just see how the sequences can stack up in that way.
And how important do you think, when we're talking about habits, do you think repetition is? Because there's so many of these sort of well-known concepts or frameworks in habit formation. One of them is that habits take roughly 66 days. One of them is that it's about repetition. Does repetition really matter?
It definitely does. Repetition is how habits form. The 66 days number comes from one study that came out that found that on average, it took about 66 days to build a habit. If you look at the study, the range is pretty wide. So if you pick something really simple, like drinking a glass of water at lunch each day, that might only take 2 or 3 weeks to form. If you look at something more complicated, like going for a run after work every day, that might take 7 or 8 or 9 months to form. And so I don't know that 66 days really tells you anything. It doesn't tell you that this is how long it's going to take for your habit to stick. The range is wide. Sometimes when people ask me how long does it take to form a habit, my answer is forever, because if you stop doing it, then it's no longer a habit. And what I'm kind of getting at with that is that habits are not a finish line to be crossed. They're a lifestyle to be lived. And so we approach our habits as if it's a finish line. Oh, let me do this 30-day cleanse and then I'll be healthy. Let me do this 90-day sprint and then the product will be shipped. I won't have to worry about it anymore. And it's like most things in life, especially the big important things, they're endless. They're endless battles. So just because you went to the gym yesterday earns you no bonus points for tomorrow. Like, you still have to show up tomorrow. Just because you were a good spouse yesterday earns you no bonus points for tomorrow. You still have to be loving and caring again. And so all the things that really matter are endless battles. And it's not about crossing a finish line. It's about living that kind of lifestyle. And so, yes, it is true that repetition matters. And yes, it is true that the habits will become more seamless and automatic and maybe a little less effortful as you repeat them more. But that doesn't mean that you'll never have to think about them or, worry about them again.
Do you think much about what's going on in the brain when repetition occurs? Like, what is it that's making it easier? If I've been on a roll with the gym, I've been going for 60 days in a row. Why does it feel easier on day 61?
That's a tricky question because if you were to talk to an academic and they would tell you like a habit is this automatic non-conscious behavior, really quick, simple things like brushing your teeth, tying your shoes. Every time you pick up a pair of barbecue tongs, you got to tap them together twice, like stuff that you don't even really think about. Okay. That's actual habitual behavior. But if I were to ask you, what are some habits you're trying to build? You would say, I'm trying to go to the gym 4 days a week, or I'm trying to write every morning, or I'm trying to meditate, 5 days a week or whatever. And I know what you mean when you say that. You mean, I want it to be this routine, this practice that I do consistently. But like, writing every day is never going to be mindless the way that brushing your teeth is. Going to the gym is not going to be automatic the way that tying your shoes might be. And so the things that there's a little bit of sloppiness in the word habits and how we use it in life. They're not automatic mindless routines most of the time. Most of the things that we want to be habits are not like reflexes. They're routines and rituals that we do consistently. Mm-hmm. So having said that, it is true that after you've gone to the gym for a month or two, it does start to get easier. And I think there's a number of forces that kind of work in your favor there. One is you've figured a lot out about what it takes to get into the gym. What time am I going? What route do I take? How do I pack my bag? Do I need to bring a water bottle, or is there a water fountain at the gym? Like, all those sorts of things are little one-time costs that you got to figure out early on, that once you're into a pattern, you already know them. The water bottle thing sounds like a small thing. I heard from someone who said, I always forget to bring my water bottle and they don't have water fountains at this gym. So like I sometimes I skip the workout because of that. It's remarkable how little friction it takes to pull us off course. Mm-hmm. And so figuring out all of those things is something that once you're a month or two in, you've fought all those battles and now you know how to do it. So that makes it easier. The other thing is you start to build friendships, start to build connections. You start to know the people there. You feel comfortable there. There's this concept Stephen Pressfield talks about where, if you have a wolf and it's roaming around, eventually it starts to feel like it has its territory. And early on in a creative process, writing a book or whatever, you go into the office for the first time to write the first chapter of the book and you kind of feel uncomfortable. It feels like it's not you yet.